Welcome to this edition of On the Scene. I'm your host, Tim Kelley. On today's program, we're going to be talking about Alzheimer's disease, specifically the Alzheimer's Association and the Walk to End Alzheimer's, an event coming up here in the city of Suffolk in mid-September. Stay tuned. Welcome back to On the Scene. Of course, we're joined by Katie McDonough, who's the Director of Program and Services for the Southeastern Virginia chapter of the Alzheimer's Association, to talk about Alzheimer's disease and really what we're talking about when we cover that particular topic. Katie, thanks for being with us today.
Glad to.
One of the things I think we'll kick off with is people sometimes get confused on, okay, what is dementia versus what is Alzheimer's disease? So how do the two correlate, and really what are we talking about when we talk about those two topics?
Sure. So dementia we often describe as an umbrella term. It is a set of symptoms that affect memory, thinking, behavior, and personality, enough to interrupt with daily life. Okay. There are various diseases that can cause dementia. Alzheimer's happens to be the most common disease that causes dementia. It is responsible, we think, for around 70 to 75% of all cases of dementia.
And Alzheimer's disease, I mean, I think people think it's just the old person's disease, but that is not the case, correct?
Right. Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging.
Right.
So we know that one of the greatest risk factors for Alzheimer's is age. Mm-hmm. So meaning the older you get, the higher your risk. But not everyone who grows older into their 80s or 90s right. Has a diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease. We can experience normal aging memory loss that's related to normal aging, mm-hmm. but with Alzheimer's disease, it affects the entire brain. So typically we see that short-term memory are some of the early symptoms. Loss of short-term memory are early symptoms, but eventually the disease progresses throughout the entire brain and affects all the different functions that the brain's responsible for.
Now, Alzheimer's disease is not anything that's necessarily new. I know we hear a lot more about it, and certainly over time, and I'm sure we'll get into the funding and everything that's going toward research as far as to try to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease. But the fact that really it is not just a new creation. It just didn't pop up overnight. I mean, certainly people just aren't all of a sudden developing it. It's just the fact that we're diagnosing it as such now. Is that an accurate way to put that?
Yes. So first of all, there's still a very significant stigma that's attached to the disease. So when someone has early memory loss, they tend to hide it, mm-hmm. Even from people they're closest to. And as that progresses into a diagnosis, that stigma only increases. So we often see that, particularly in the past, no one really talked about it, just like a lot of other diseases. Right. Historically, we are seeing that people are talking about memory loss more. Right. We're not where we need to be, mm-hmm. but we certainly have seen some progress. And yeah, we've gotten a lot better at being able to diagnose the disease. We know that there are physicians who are asking more questions earlier right. to people in their lives. So we've gotten a little bit better at talking about this disease.
Bringing it a little closer to home, in Virginia, what are the numbers that we're talking about with the amount of people that perhaps have been diagnosed or that y'all are looking at when you look at the state of Virginia as far as what we're dealing with Alzheimer's disease? Yeah,
so nationally we know that there are 5.8 million Americans living with Alzheimer's. Okay. Here in Virginia, that number is about 150,000. That number nationally is expected to rise to 14 million by 2050. Here in Virginia, it's 190,000. So we're expecting significant increases, mainly because we're seeing a shift in the demographics of aging. We have the big baby boom generation right. that's aging right. Into their 65 or older. But we also know that, again, we're diagnosing more. And we're discovering better ways to identify symptoms and then also diagnose a little bit more accurately through some of the research that strides that are being made.
What would you say is being done now as far as the treatment? I mean, what can people who are dealing with the disease, what benefits, not about benefits, what enhancements or what progression have we made as far as trying to, work toward a cure and find the things that are maybe helping them manage it to a certain degree? I mean, what's in play right now?
So Alzheimer's is the 6th leading cause of death in this country. Of the top 10 leading causes of death, it's the only one that doesn't have a way to prevent, treat, or cure the disease. So there are medications, FDA-approved medications are on the market, but none of those medications treat the disease itself.
Got it.
They can't slow the disease progression in the brain. They can't stop it or reverse the damage that's done. They can help with symptoms, so they can kind of give the brain a little boost. It can increase the brain's ability to function with what has not been damaged.
Correct.
But we have not yet found a treatment that actually changes the progression of the disease. There's been lots of media attention recently to some of the failures of drugs, unfortunately. But what we believe in the Alzheimer's Association and know as the largest funder on the planet for Alzheimer's research is every time we fail, we learn something. Right? And one of the things that we're learning more and more is, and we're asking more and more is, if we're able to more accurately diagnose, so if we're able to develop a blood test or use spinal fluid that allows us to diagnose Alzheimer's much like we would blood pressure or cholesterol, would we be able to identify the development of the disease in the brain prior to symptoms occurring, and then perhaps could giving someone a treatment at that point in the disease progression, much like we do with heart disease or cardiovascular disease, would that have a better effect? Would we see a better outcome? So a lot of the research is turning to a combination of early diagnosis and then the question of treatment. We also know, as we do with many diseases, that prevention is a big part of how we combat chronic illness. Right? And so we can look at myriads of other diseases that we've really affected and decreased mortality rates with because we can prevent it. So research is showing that there are 4 main areas that someone can pay attention to closely to help either decrease their risk or delay the onset. And those 4 areas are diet, exercise, cognitive activity, and social interaction. Diet and exercise are much like what we're used to with the heart, right? We are learning that what's good for our heart is good for our brain and vice versa. Cognitive activity is learning new things throughout life, challenging that brain to create those new electrical impulses and to keep active. And lastly, socialization, that as we get older, one of the biggest risks we face, particularly if we have mobility challenges, is we become isolated. And staying socially engaged is incredibly important. So the Alzheimer's Association is funding one of the largest, actually the largest, study in the United States on prevention of Alzheimer's disease. It's called the U.S. Pointer Study, and it's looking at those 4 interventions and how those affect the rate or the risk for Alzheimer's.
How early on in that study are we at this stage?
Very early.
Okay.
Yeah. We're within the first couple of years of that. Yeah, so we're still, it's a nationwide study, but we're still developing the sites that will be responsible for that and then beginning that recruitment process of candidates.
Now, I know all the research and the studies and drug development, everything, you need money, financing to be able to make this happen. And certainly I know that y'all are advocating on the federal level, probably on the state level and even on a local level to whatever extent, the fact that getting these funds to and I know the funds have increased over time, but where are we with the need for more funding for that, and how is that process working? Sort of an overview on that type of approach.
Yes, so funding, comes from 2 primary sources: the private sector and the public sector. So the Alzheimer's Association really leads the charge in the private sector funding of research. So this is where young scientists who have new ideas that they want to test out, they need money that's very nimble and that they can access fairly quickly. That's where the Alzheimer's Association grants come in. If from those studies we find that there's success and there's potential for applying them to much larger populations, then we move over to the public side. And the greatest resource for that is the National Institutes of Health. Just a few years ago, Alzheimer's research funding through the National Institutes of Health was just a mere $350,000
Wow.
or $350 million
Right.
a year.
Right.
Through advocacy, through everyday people who picked up the phone and called their member of Congress, their senator, or made visits to the office, we've been able to increase that. For in fiscal year 2019, it was $2.3 billion.
Okay.
So we know that we need to continue to increase
Right.
that. We know that other diseases like heart disease and cancer are upwards of 5, 6, even higher $billion a year. We know that we need more funding to fund the existing work that's being done,
Right.
but we also know that when there's more funding available, it turns the attention to the most talented scientists
Correct.
in our country, and we want to be able to do that and provide that opportunity.
Very good. Well, we have probably about a couple minutes left in our segment today, so I want to give an opportunity to talk a little bit about what the Alzheimer's Association does as far as for services, as well as if someone is out there watching this program and they're just starting to tackle this topic, or they've been involved with it with either a relative, maybe themselves or someone they know, how they can get support from your organization. So if you could talk a little bit about that, please. And I know there's some great resources that are there.
Yes. So the easiest way to get in touch with us anywhere someone is in the country is 1-800-272-3900, and that's our 24/7 helpline. It's open 365 days a year, all day, all night long. You can call that if you have a simple question. We have caregivers that call that in the middle of the night when they're in a crisis and they don't know what to do.
Correct.
So that's the easiest way. We have over 80 chapters throughout the country in local communities that provide programs and services on the ground. Those programs can range from caregiver support groups in communities. We have 2 here in Suffolk, and 1 in Franklin and 1 in Smithfield.
Okay.
And they're all volunteer-led. And those are great ways to connect with other caregivers and really learn practical knowledge about how to respond to the disease. We have early stage programming, which provides socialization activities for those who are living in the early stages, as well as support groups for care partners and those living with a diagnosis in the early stages. We provide community education throughout the community, whether that be faith communities, whether that be civic groups. It's very common to find that people really want to understand the basics of Alzheimer's, you know, and there's a knowledge gap there. And so we want to make sure that we're reaching folks to make sure that they understand the very basics of the disease and that we're all at risk, at varying risk for Alzheimer's or related dementias. And we do one-on-one counseling either in our local offices, in person, via phone, or through that 1-800 number, which again is 1-800-272-3900. And of course, the Alzheimer's Association website is fantastically valuable. Not only is there information there are ways to connect with other caregivers. If you can't get out of the house, you can do that via the website. You can go on and make a plan for care. You can access resources in your local community just by putting in your zip code. You can even take a virtual tour of the brain to learn more about how Alzheimer's affects the brain.
And I think you've touched on it quite a bit, but the fact that it's not just the people that are living with the disease, but it's the people that are the caregivers, and that sort of really is the infrastructure that person really depends upon, and giving those resources to them and making sure that they have a sense that they're not out there by themselves. They have information they can get, like you talked about the plan and some other things they can do, and I think that's really important to creating that positive environment for the person that is again dealing with the disease itself, right?
We want people to engage with us as early as possible. We don't want people to wait until it gets really hard, right? Or when there's a crisis, because then it's harder to make that plan or implement that plan. So we want people to engage as soon after a diagnosis as possible. And we want to engage the person living with Alzheimer's as much as we can in making that plan. You're right about caregivers. I mean, we have over 18 million caregivers in this country, 465,000 in Virginia. They provide hundreds of millions of hours of care, and we know that their lives are greatly impacted. Loss of jobs, loss of income, and even sometimes their health deteriorates quicker than the person they're caring for. So we want to make sure that we engage with caregivers and help support them in the ways that they need us to.
And I think one of the great ways that support is offered is through events like the Walk to End Alzheimer's, which of course we'll be talking about right after this break. An event coming up here in the city of Suffolk in mid-September, covering the Western Tidewater region. A great event, great opportunity to get more information, to get tapped into that community out there, to get some of that support, as well as also to pay tribute to perhaps relatives or loved ones that have suffered from the disease and have passed on. But again, a great way to get involved with the community there. And Katie, thanks for your time today.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. And we'll have more on the scene when we return. Welcome back to On the Scene. We're joined now by two special guests to talk about a very special event that's going to be taking place here in the city of Suffolk in mid-September. And of course, we're talking about the Walk to End Alzheimer's. And joining us today, we have our mayor, Linda Johnson, and we have Barbara Monteith, who is the staff lead for the Suffolk Walk. Ladies, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for having us.
So when we talk about the Walk to End Alzheimer's, kind of let's give an overview of what the event is and sort of what it's all about.
Sure.
I'll let you start.
Okay. So the Walk to End Alzheimer's, it's the world's largest event to raise awareness and funds for Alzheimer's care, support, and research. It's something that takes place nationwide in over 600 communities. The Western Tidewater Walk to End Alzheimer's is scheduled for Saturday, September 14th at the YMCA Camp Arrowhead in Suffolk. And I encourage all of your listeners and viewers to get involved with this walk.
Very good. Now, when we talk about the walk, what's going to be taking place the day of? What are some of the events that kind of make up the multitude of things that will be happening?
Sure.
Because it's not just walking, correct?
No, that's correct. So if you've never been to a walk before, the first thing you'll notice is a lot of purple.
Right.
Purple is the official color of the Alzheimer's Association. It's a very family-friendly event, so bring your kids, bring your grandkids. A lot of people bring their pets.
Right.
There's no registration fee,
Okay.
but those people who raise $100 or more will receive the official 2019 Walk to End Alzheimer's T-shirt,
Nice.
which of course is purple. One thing, everybody who registers for the walk, regardless of how much money they raise, receive a promise garden flower.
Okay.
And there's 4 different colors to the promise garden flowers, which
Sure.
I have here today.
Right.
And the colors represent your relationship to the disease. So the blue flower is for people who have Alzheimer's.
Okay.
Yellow flower is for people who are caregivers.
Got it.
Purple flower is for somebody who has lost somebody to Alzheimer's disease. And the orange flower is for people that may not have a personal connection, but they support the Alzheimer's Association and share our vision of a world without Alzheimer's.
Got it.
And we call them our advocates.
Right.
So, speaking of advocacy, one of the important components of Walk Day, we will have volunteers circulating through the crowds with postcards, asking participants to sign those postcards
Nice.
that are then sent to their elected officials. And one of the asks on that postcard is to increase federal funding for Alzheimer's research. Now, when I first started the Alzheimer's Association about 7 years ago, the NIH was receiving about $450 million in research money, which is really not a lot. It's a drop in the bucket compared to other major diseases.
Sure.
The last fiscal year, it had increased to $2.3 billion. So that's really has come about from the efforts of the Alzheimer's Association
Sure.
and advocates like you and me that are out there signing those postcards. So Alzheimer's disease, it can be very isolating, not only for the person with the disease, but
Right.
the caregiver. But Walk Day is a day full of hope. And you look around and you see all these other people that are experiencing something similar to you. You're signing those advocacy cards, doing something about this disease.
Right.
There's all sorts of information about different services that are available. So it's a very upbeat day.
Right. Sounds like it's definitely community oriented. You talked about the promise card, and then really how the different colors represent different people that are affected. And I think it's great because you're bringing everyone together for the sense of community, the fact that, like you said, you're not alone in this. And the fact that there are resources out there, there's information out there, there are people that you can relate to that are going through similar circumstances. And I think that's one of the key things that I always think about when we talk about this topic. Unfortunately, we have to do this every year because of the fact that we don't have a cure and we're not in that area yet, hopefully trending that way, obviously. But the fact that we are talking about this. And I'd like to give both of you an opportunity, and Mayor, I'm going to start with you. What does this event mean to you? and certainly your involvement over the years as far as working with the walked-in Alzheimer's.
I have been involved really for a number of years with this, and for me it's a very personal journey because I've known so many people and families that have been connected with Alzheimer's.
Right.
I believe I've told the story many times. My next door neighbor was 58 when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. At that point in time, I believed it was a disease of the old, and I really thought it came on with age, and so I was shocked when she actually told me I've been diagnosed, and it went very quickly. So watching that, and then I've realized over the years my mother is now going on 97 years old.
Right.
Blessed not to have Alzheimer's, but I will tell you in the last month I have realized that my mother doesn't know me. And so it takes on a special meaning to me right now to understand that part of it as well, because you don't understand some of these things until you've actually been through them.
Correct.
Or watched families go through them. For me, part of this day is really with the caregivers, because they put their heart and soul every single day in taking care of their loved one. And also there are many of the companies out here that are doing a wonderful job as caregivers and showing that love and compassion and feeling, because while we don't know what they're thinking, we do know that they are still here and with us and very much a part of us.
Right.
So the community can come out and embrace the caregivers, embrace the survivors, embrace the people that are dealing with it now, the people that are hurting.
Right.
I've watched many children, grandchildren, they're there, and they're there understanding why they're there because their parents have brought them. And so I think it's no accident that this research dollar has gone up and up and up. Correct. Because people are becoming very aware and believing that there can be a cure. And I believe there can be a cure.
Correct.
There are new drugs out there, and there are new things that they're working on every day. And my brother is a doctor at NIH, and I can speak to research, not Alzheimer's, but you are correct. The numbers are quite different depending on the disease, whatever it may be.
Right.
And Alzheimer's is every bit as devastating as any of those diseases.
And I think the fact we talked about community earlier, and Mayor, you touched on it, but you'll have people probably there the day of the walk, I'm sure this occurs, who are probably entering the world of dealing with Alzheimer's in whatever capacity that they are at different stages. They just found out about a relative, maybe they just lost someone that they love dearly. I mean, so there's different people that enter at different parts of the spectrum, if you will, in that sense, who are looking for that sense of community, that sense that I'm not alone in this, and that there is information, there's things that I can gain from this and really grow from this event, and also just the bonding experience, which I'm sure really makes a difference for everyone. Barbara, your experience as far as with the event itself, and really what kind of brought you into working with Alzheimer's Association?
So my first walk was in 2007. My mom had just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, so it was a way for me to honor her, also to raise awareness. So, 2007, 12 years ago, there's been a lot of awareness growing in the last 12 years, but 2007 it wasn't as great as that. So yes, I first started participating in the walk to honor my mom. She passed in 2016, so now I walk in her memory. Right. And my hope is really that my kids don't lose their mom the same way that I lost my mom.
Sure. Now, when we talked about registration, the ability to early register, that would, how can people do that? I'm assuming you have an online component. Is there also walk up the day of, or how is that structured?
Yes, so you can always register on walk day, and registration opens at 8:30 a.m. But I would encourage people to register ahead of time, and they can do that at alz.org/walk.
Now, do you have to register as a group, or can you do group or individual? How can you be involved?
Either one. So we encourage people to form teams, get together with your friends, family, neighbors, coworkers. But if you want to walk just as an individual, that's also possible.
And a team's going to grab you. They're going to take you as soon as you get there. They're going to be there. So.
Sort of guilt by association, that works wonderfully. We have a couple minutes left in this particular segment, and I want to give both of you an opportunity for people who have not participated before, or perhaps are thinking about it and want to really just get more information about the impact of Alzheimer's on themselves or even on the community. What would you say to them to encourage them to come out and participate maybe for the first time at this year's walk event? Mayor?
The most powerful moment is when you listen to the person speak who is either going through the disease or the caregiver for that person. You will also hear from folks that have lost people. And as you're listening to those words, I think it becomes very, very real to you why you're walking, what you're hoping to achieve here. And the biggest part of it too is that in the last 3 or 4 years, you're correct, I've watched the hope rise. I've watched things become more positive. I've watched the good news coming across that stage. And so while we know we have a long way to go, it's just a day of really bringing people up and bringing us together and making sure that everybody understands you are not alone.
Barbara?
We call these promise garden flowers
Right.
for a reason. The blue, as I said, was for people with Alzheimer's disease. Our promise to them is to honor them, give them a life full of dignity and love. The yellow flowers for caregivers, and our promise to them is to care for them, because caregiving can just be so exhausting. The purple flowers for those who've lost someone, and our promise to them is to help them remember their loved ones. And then the the orange flowers for advocates, and that promise is that we will continue the fight to step up for people who may not be able to advocate for themselves anymore. So again, just that feeling of community, and for me, it was a chance to actually be doing something positive when I'm faced with this disease.
Understand completely. So again, we're talking Saturday, September 14th.
Yes.
And it's at a new location this year, correct?
It is. It is at the YMCA Camp Arrowhead
Right.
on 275 Kenyon Road
Right.
in Suffolk.
Got it. So
Great
again, a
place.
great venue, a great opportunity to go out there. We're going to have great weather, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And I assume the walk is rain or shine, right?
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Good
But
deal.
we always have good
Well,
weather.
that's what I was going to say. So we like to qualify that, but we always
right.
want to say it's going to be sun shining on the day, so don't worry about
right.
that. Well, ladies, I appreciate your time today to talk about this great event. Again, Saturday, September the 14th, right here in the city of Suffolk, the Western Tidewater Walked into Alzheimer's, an event you definitely want to take part in and be a part of in this great community that continues to grow and again offer resources and support for everyone involved. I want to thank you again for your time today. That will do it for this edition of On the Scene. I'm your host, Tim Kelley. We'll see you next time.